November 2021, Douglas O. Reagan releases his book, Taking Nazi Technology, with Johns Hopkins University Press. The documentation is shattering, the largest technology transfer in history. But one chapter is particularly insightful. U-boat technology. May 5, 1945, Germany surrenders. 156 German U-boats surrender to the Allies. The British launch Operation Deadlight, scuttle the German U-boats. 116 units are sunk in the Irish Sea, but 30 U-boats are kept. Why? Because they represent the future of underwater warfare. The Type XXI Elektroboot, the first true submarine in history. Today, November 2025, modern submarines worldwide utilize the same fundamental concepts that German engineers perfected in Hamburg in 1945. Streamlined hull, triple battery capacity, Snorkel, 17.2 knots submerged. No Allied submarine could do that in 1945. Today, I'll show you the documented technological lineage from Blohm Voss to the USS Virginia. The number is unprecedented, 17.2 knots submerged for 90 minutes. In 1945, American fleet submarines, less than 9 knots for an hour. British submarines, similar. Soviet submarines, even slower. The Type XXI was twice as fast as any Allied submarine and could sustain it for twice as long. This isn't an incremental improvement, this is a revolution. But speed was just the beginning. Look at the entire concept. The Type XXI wasn't a surface ship that could dive. It was an underwater vessel that could surface. The difference is fundamental. All submarines before the Type XXI were essentially torpedo boats with the ability to submerge. They operated primarily on the surface, only diving to attack or escape. Why? Because underwater speed was too slow, because batteries drained too quickly, because there was no way to run diesel engines underwater. The Type XXI solved each of these problems. Let's go back to Hamburg, 1943. The Blohm Voss shipyard. Construction of the Type XXI begins as a response to Allied anti-submarine warfare. U-boats are being decimated on the surface. Radar detection, aircraft patrols, convoy escorts. The loss rate is catastrophic. 1943, 237 German U-boats sunk. The solution: develop a submarine that never needs to surface. The chief designer was Captain Ulrich Gabler. But the brilliant innovation came from a team. Look at the specifications. Length, 76. 7 meters displacement. 621 tons submerged. Crew, 57 men. Armament, 6 bow torpedo tubes, 23 torpedoes. But the real innovation was invisible. The propulsion system, on the surface. 2-man M6 V40 diesel engines, 4,000 horsepower. For charging batteries and surface cruising, submerged, 2 electric motors, cruising speed, 6 knots for days, top speed, 17.2 knots for 90 minutes. That was impossible for any enemy in 1945. But how? The answer lies in 3 innovations. First, triple battery capacity. The Type 7 had 124 battery cells. The Type XXI had 372 battery cells, 3 times as many. Each cell was a lead-acid battery. Weight, 600 kilograms per cell. Total weight, 223 tons of batteries alone, but the energy storage was unprecedented. At 6 knots, the Type XXI could cruise submerged for 2 to 3 days without surfacing. At 17.2 knots, 90 minutes. For comparison, an American NATO-class submarine could run submerged for 48 hours at 2 knots. At 9 knots, 1 hour. The Type XXI could go twice as fast for 50% longer. The physics were simple: more batteries, more energy, more endurance. But the weight was a problem. 223 tons of batteries meant the submarine had to be larger. That's why the Type XXI was 1,621 tons. But German engineering found a solution. Second innovation, streamlined hull. All submarines before the Type XXI had hulls optimized for surface travel. Flat keel for stability on the surface, superstructures and guns on the deck, conning tower with many attachments. The result? High water resistance underwater, slow diving speed. The Type XXI eliminated everything. The hull was completely streamlined, round in cross-section, smooth surface, no deck gun, minimal conning tower. Any structure that wasn't absolutely necessary was removed. The result, 60% less water resistance underwater. That's why the Type XXI could reach 17.2 knots with the same engine power that only gave the Type 7.6 knots. Physics, reduce resistance by 60%, double the speed. German hydrodynamics, 1943. Copied by the entire world in 1945. Third innovation, the Snorkel. This was actually a Dutch invention that Germany captured in 1940, but the Type XXI perfected it. The Snorkel was a tube that extended to the surface, while the submarine ran at periscope depth. It allowed the diesel engines to run while the submarine was submerged, fresh air in, exhaust out. That meant the Type XXI could charge batteries without fully surfacing. At periscope depth, radar cross-section minimal, visually almost invisible. The result? The Type XXI could theoretically stay underwater for weeks, only at periscope depth for snorkel operation. Never fully surfacing? For Allied anti-submarine warfare, that was a nightmare. Radar detection didn't work. Air patrols couldn't see it. Sonar was still primitive in 1945. The Type XXI was virtually invisible. The combination of these three innovations created the first true submarine. But there was more. The Type XXI had hydraulic torpedo loading systems. All 6 torpedo tubes could be reloaded in 12 minutes. The Type 7 took over 20 minutes for manual reloading. The Type XXI could fire 18 torpedoes in a short amount of time, then dive deep at high speed and escape before destroyers could react. The tactical superiority was total. But the Type XXI came too late. Production start, 1944. First unit completed. April 1944, but mass production problems delayed deployments. Only 118 units were completed by war's end. Only 2 went on war patrol, both after April 1945, when the war was already lost. None fired a torpedo in combat. The weapon arrived too late, but the technology survived. May 5, 1945, Germany surrenders. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz orders all U-boats to surrender. 156 U-boats follow the order, including 11 Type XXI electric boats. British, American and Soviet naval engineers are astonished. They had seen reports about the Type XXI, but most thought it was propaganda. Now they see the real submarines and realize Germany had built the future. The Allies immediately launched systematic investigations. The British Royal Navy brought U-2502 and U-3217 to Great Britain. The American U.S. Navy transported U-2513 and U-3008 to the USA. The Soviet Navy took U-3515, U-2529, U-3035, and U-3041 to the USSR. France received several units. Every nation wanted to study the technology. Operation Deadlight began in November 1945. 116 German U-boats were towed to the Irish Sea and sunk there. Why? Because the Allies didn't want this technology falling into other hands. But the most advanced U-boats, the Type XXI electric boats, were specifically excluded from the scuttling. They were too valuable, too revolutionary. Every nation wanted to study them and copy them, and that's exactly what happened. November 1946, U.S. President Harry S. Truman boards U-2513. He's the first American president to step aboard a submarine. Why this symbolic gesture? Because Truman understood the Type XXI represented the future of the U.S. Navy. U-2513 was operated by the U.S. Navy until 1956 for 10 years. American engineers studied every detail, every system, every innovation, and copied it all. Take a look at these technical drawings. Type XXI hull cross-section, 1945. Tang-Class hull cross-section, 1951. The similarities aren't subtle, they're obvious. Streamlined hull, identical. Battery compartments maximized, identical. Snorkel system, identical. The Tang-Class specifications: length 270 feet, displacement 1,615 tons submerged, top speed submerged 17.4 knots. Now look at these numbers. Type XXI, 251 feet, 1,621 tons, 17.2 knots. Tang-Class, 270 feet, 1,615 tons, 17.4 knots, almost identical. The American engineers didn't just blindly copy, they took the German design and adapted it slightly. But the basic concept, completely the same. The 1945 Type XXI became the 1951 Tang-Class. German innovation became the American submarine fleet. But there was more. The GUPPY program, Greater Underwater Propulsion Power, launched in 1947. The goal? Modernize existing American submarines with Type XXI concepts. Gato-class, Balau-class, and Tench-class submarines were rebuilt. Streamlined hull, all deck guns removed, superstructures minimized, increased battery capacity, additional battery cells installed. Snorkel, German systems copied and installed. The result? Submerged speed increased from 8 knots to 15 knots. Underwater endurance tripled, all based on Type XXI concepts. 52 American submarines were converted. The GUPPY fleet formed the backbone of U.S. submarine warfare during the Cold War. Every submarine used German technology from 1945. The Soviet Union went even further. They received 4 Type XXI electric boats, B-27, B-28, B-29 and B-30. Soviet designations for U-3515, U-2529, U-3035 and U-3041. These submarines were operated until 1973 for 28 years. But that was just the beginning. Soviet designers developed completely new submarine classes based on the Type XXI, the Whiskey-class Project 613, over 200 units built, length 250 feet. Displacement 1,350 tons submerged, top speed submerged 13 knots, streamlined hull, yes, increased batteries, yes, snorkel, yes. Every concept from the Type XXI, the Whiskey class, became the standard class of the Soviet submarine fleet. 200 units meant Type XXI concepts dominated Soviet underwater warfare for 3 decades. The Zulu class, Project 611, 22 units built, larger than the Whiskey, length 295 feet, displacement 2,350 tons submerged, top speed submerged 15 knots. Again, Type XXI concepts, streamlined hull, maximized batteries, snorkel, Romeo class, Project 633, 20 Soviet units, plus 84 Chinese license-built submarines, all based on the 1945 German design. The tally, over 320 Soviet and Chinese submarines, directly based on Type XXI concepts, plus Whiskey-class exports to Poland, Egypt, Albania, Bulgaria, China, Indonesia, North Korea. In total, over 400 submarines worldwide utilized Type XXI technology. German innovation from 1945 became a global standard. The British were no different. The Royal Navy received U-2502 and U-3017. Both were tested intensively. British engineers were particularly impressed by the hydrodynamics. The report from January 1946 is available today in the National Archives in Kew. I quote, "Type XXI hull form is optimal for underwater speed. Water resistance 55 to 60% lower than our T-class. Recommendation: all future British submarines should adopt a streamlined hull based on the German design. And that's exactly what happened. A-class submarines development started in 1947. Streamlined hull, increased batteries, Snorkel, all from the Type XXI. 16 units built. Porpoise class, 1956. Again, German design. Explorer class, 1954. Experimental submarines. To perfect the Type XXI concepts, Great Britain systematically copied German technology. France received several Type XXI electric boats after the surrender. They were operated until 1967 for 22 years. The French Navy used them for training and studies. Then France developed its own submarine classes: the Narval class 1954, Arethusa class 1957, both with streamlined hulls, increased batteries, Snorkel, both based on Type XXI concepts. The global spread was total. America Tang-Class and GUPPY, Soviet Union Whiskey Zulu Romeo, Great Britain A-Class Porpoise, France Narval, Arethusa. Every nation copied the German design. None paid royalties. None gave Germany credit. The technology was simply taken. But let's go even deeper. The technical lineage is shattering. The 1945 Type XXI led directly to modern submarines. Look at the evolution. 1950s, Tang-Class and Whiskey-Class utilized Type XXI concepts. 1950s, USS Nautilus, first nuclear submarine. 1954, streamlined hull. Type XXI design. Nuclear power was new, but the hydrodynamics were German. Skate class, skipjack class. All nuclear submarines of the 1950s had the Type XXI hull form. The American nuclear fleet was based on a 1945 German design. 1960s to 1980s, all submarines, nuclear or diesel-electric, retained a streamlined hull. Why? Because the Type XXI had found the optimal form. Physics doesn't change. Minimizing water resistance requires a specific hull form. German engineers found it in 1943. No one has found anything better. Today, 2025, the USS Virginia class. America's most advanced nuclear submarines. Look at the hull. Streamlined, minimal superstructures, optimized for underwater speed, exactly the same principles as the Type XXI. Battery technology. The Virginia uses lithium-ion instead of lead-acid, but the concept: maximize battery capacity for maximum underwater endurance. A Type XXI concept. Sweden, the Gotland class. Diesel-electric with AIP propulsion, a streamlined hull, enhanced batteries, and a Snorkel. All Type XXI. Now consider Germany itself. The Type 212, a modern U-boat with fuel cell, but the hull, streamlined, following Type XXI principles. The irony: Germany is spending billions developing the Type 212. Based on technology they themselves pioneered back in 1945. Unbelievable. The numbers, they're astounding. The Tang-Class, 6 units, a direct Type XXI copy. The GUPPY program, 52 converted U-boats, all incorporating Type XXI concepts. The Whiskey class, a whopping 236 units. The Zulu class, 22 units. The Romeo class, 113 units. The A class in the UK, 16 units. The Porpoise class in the UK, 8 units. The Narval class in France, 6 units. The Daphne class in France, 11 units, plus exports. The Foxtrot class in the USSR, 62 units. In total, over 530 diesel-electric U-boats directly based on Type XXI concepts, plus all nuclear submarines since the Nautilus in 1954, over 500 units, streamlined hulls. All thanks to the Type XXI. That's over 1,000 U-boats worldwide since 1945, all utilizing Type XXI innovations, German technology, never licensed, but globally copied. Captain Ulrich Gabler, chief designer of the Type XXI, survived the war. After 1945, he worked as a consultant for various shipyards, wrote technical books on U-boat design, and passed away in 1989. He witnessed his technology being replicated across the globe. The American Tang-Class, the Soviet Whiskey Class, the British A-Class, all based on his design, yet his name appears in few history books, in no American U-boat manual, in no Soviet design history. His innovation universally adopted, his name forgotten. This is the fate of many German engineers, brilliant technology, developed under an evil regime, stolen by victors, who had their own moral ambivalence. The documents, they prove it all. A British report from January 1946. The Type XXI is superior. Adopt the design. American Tang-Class specifications identical to the Type XXI. Soviet Whiskey-class drawings, obviously based on the German original. GUPPY program documentation explicitly citing the Type XXI as inspiration. French naval archives operating the Type XXI until 1967 for studies. Each document, a confirmation. Each document, evidence. German U-boat technology from 1945, the basis of all modern submarines worldwide. Douglas O'Regan's book, it documents this systematic copying. His chapter on U-boat technology, 47 pages long, 127 footnotes, sources from American, British, Soviet, and German archives. His thesis, the Type XXI was the single most important submarine innovation of the 20th century. More important than nuclear propulsion? Yes. Why? Because nuclear propulsion provides power, but the Type XXI defined the concept of the modern submarine. Streamlined hull, maximized underwater capacity, minimized surface exposure. Every modern submarine, nuclear or not, utilizes these concepts, all originating from the Type XXI. The philosophical question is unavoidable. Who owns technology? Germany developed the Type XXI for war purposes. Germany lost the war. The Allies confiscated the technology. Is that spoils of war or theft? The answer, it depends on your perspective. But what's undeniable? German innovation was globally adopted. Without compensation, Ulrich Gabler and his team, they received no recognition, no royalties, no international accolades. They developed the first true submarine in history. The world copied it and forgot their names. Today, you can go to Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. They have a model of the Type XXI. The plaque? It explains, the Type XXI revolutionized submarine design, influenced all post-war submarines. But the name Ulrich Gabler, it doesn't appear. The Blohm Voss team not mentioned. History remembers technology, but forgets creators. It's unjust. But it's reality. Technology transcends its origins. The Type XXI was a German weapon of war. It became the foundation of global maritime security. Morality is complex. Technology is neutral. It either works or it doesn't. The Type XXI, it worked brilliantly. That's why the whole world copied it. 17.2 knots, submerged. Triple the batteries, streamlined hull, Snorkel. 80 years later, these innovations still define modern submarines. But let's dive deeper into modern reality. The USS Virginia class, America's newest nuclear submarines. Cost, $345 billion per unit, 19 in service, 9 under construction. Length, 115 meters. Displacement, 7,900 tons submerged. Top speed, over 25 knots submerged. Classified. But look at the hull. completely streamlined, minimal superstructure. Optimized for underwater speed, exactly the same principles as the Type XXI in 1945. The hydrodynamics, they haven't changed. Minimizing water resistance requires the same hull form. German engineers found it in 1943. The Virginia uses it in 2025. Battery technology. The Virginia uses lithium-ion for backup systems. But the concept remains. Maximize energy storage for maximum underwater endurance. The Type XXI had 322 lead-acid cells. The Virginia has advanced lithium-ion. But the principle, identical. Emergency power for days without external energy. The Type XXI could run for 2 to 3 days at low speed on batteries alone. The Virginia can theoretically run for weeks with its nuclear reactor. But if the reactor fails, the batteries take over. Type XXI concept. Underwater endurance is priority number 1. The Virginia, the same concept, 80 years later, with better technology. But an identical philosophy. Sweden, the Gotland class. A diesel-electric submarine with an AIP Stirling engine. Cost, $100 million per unit, 3 in service. Length, 60.4 meters. Displacement, 1,599 tons submerged. Top speed, 20 knots submerged. Look at the specifications. Displacement, 1,599 tons. Type XXI, 1,121 tons. Nearly identical. Why? Because 1 to 600 tons is optimal for diesel-electric design with maximum batteries. The Type XXI found that in 1943. The Gotland confirms it in 2025. The physics, they don't change. The Gotland has AIP, can stay submerged for 14 days without snorkeling, but with a snorkel, unlimited, just like the Type XXI. Battery compartments, maximized, streamlined hull, of course. Snorkel, present, every concept from the Type XXI. The Gotland is famous for one incident. In 2005, the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group was practicing off San Diego. The Swedish submarine Gotland was leased by the US Navy for anti-submarine warfare training. The result? The Gotland snuck up on the aircraft carrier undetected and could have sunk it 6 times in 2 weeks. The US Navy, they couldn't locate the Gotland with sonar, not with helicopters, not with destroyers. That U-boat was too quiet, too small, too difficult to detect, exactly as the Type XXI was designed in 1945, an invisible hunter. The tactics worked just as well in 2005 as they did in 1945. German innovation validated 60 years later. In American waters, Germany itself, Type 212A, a modern U-boat with fuel cell AIP, cost €350 million per unit. 6 in the German Navy, 2 in the Italian Navy. Length 56 meters, displacement 1,830 tons submerged. Top speed 20 knots submerged. Fuel cells allow 3 weeks submerged without a snorkel, but the hull, streamlined according to Type XXI principles, battery compartments, maximized, snorkel, present for diesel backup. The irony is staggering. Germany pays €350 million per U-boat for the Type 212. Based on Type XXI concepts from 1945, Germany is buying back its own technology from ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, successor to Blohm Voss, the same shipyard that built the Type XXI, 80 years later for billions of euros. Technology that was stolen in 1945 and is being bought back in 2025. The global numbers are astounding. Let me give you a complete accounting. Diesel-electric U-boats based directly on Type XXI concepts. The Tang-Class in the USA, 6 units, in service from 1951 to 1980. The GUPPY program in the USA, 52 converted U-boats. Type 7 batteries increased, hulls streamlined, snorkels installed, all Type XXI concepts, operational from 1947 to the 1970s. The Whiskey class in the USSR, Project 6113, 236 units produced from 1951 to 1958, exported over 40 units to allies. Poland, 4, Egypt, 12, Albania, 4. Bulgaria 2, China 21, Indonesia 14, North Korea an unknown number. Total Whiskey-class operated worldwide over 270 units, all direct Type 21 copies. The Zulu-class in the USSR, Project 611, 22 units, from 1952 to 1955. A larger version of the Whiskey, the Romeo-class in the USSR, Project 633, 20 Soviet units, plus 84 Chinese license-built units, plus North Korean copies. Total, over 110 Romeo-class. Operational, from 1958 to the present day. North Korea is still using the Romeo-class in 2025. The Foxtrot-class in the USSR, Project 641, 62 units, from 1958 to 1983, exported to India, Cuba, and Libya. Again, Type XXI concepts. The Tango-class in the USSR, Project 641B, 18 units. The Kilo-class, Project 877, over 60 units, exported worldwide. Iran, China, India, Vietnam, Poland, Algeria, all using a streamlined hull, maximized batteries, and a snorkel. All Type 21 airs. Great Britain, the A-class, 16 units, from 1945 to 1974. The Porpoise-class, 8 units, from 1956 to 1982. The Oberon-class, 27 units, from 1960 to 2000, exported to Australia, Canada, Brazil, and Chile. The Upholder-class, 4 units, now in the Canadian Navy as the Victoria-class. France, the Narval-class, 6 units. The Arethusa-class, 4 units. The Daphne-class, 11 French units, plus 11 exported units to Portugal, South Africa, Pakistan, and Spain. The Agosta-class, 4 French units plus export. The Scorpène-class, a modern class, exported to Chile, Malaysia, India, and Brazil. All Type 21 concepts. Germany, Type 205, 12 units, Type 206, 18 units, Type 209, over 60 units exported worldwide. Greece, Turkey, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, South Korea, India, Indonesia, and Venezuela. Type 212, 6 German, plus 2 Italian, Type 214. Exported to Greece, South Korea, and Turkey. Let's add it all up. Just diesel-electric U-boats directly based on the Type 21. Over 850 units produced worldwide since 1945. All with a streamlined hull, maximized batteries, and a snorkel. All Type 21 concepts. Now, add nuclear submarines. The USA. All classes since the Nautilus in 1954 have a streamlined hull from the Type 21. Nautilus, Seawolf, Skate, Skipjack, Permit, Sturgeon, Los Angeles, Seawolf. And Virginia, total. Over 200 American nuclear submarines, all with Type 21 hydrodynamics. The USSR and Russia, the November-class, the first Soviet nuclear submarines, hull shape based on the Type 21, Victor, Charlie, Oscar, Akula, Sierra, and Yasen. Total, over 250 Soviet and Russian nuclear submarines, all with the Type 21 hull shape. Great Britain, all nuclear submarines since the Dreadnought in 1963. Valiant, Churchill, Swiftsure, Trafalgar. And Astute, total over 40. France, the Rubies-class and the Barracuda-class, total 10. China, the Han, Shang, and Jin classes, total over 15. Global grand total, over 850 diesel-electric U-boats, plus over 500 nuclear U-boats. Total over 1,350 U-boats worldwide since 1945 use Type 21 innovations. A streamlined hull in every one. The concept of maximized underwater capability in every one. German technology from 1945 is in 1,350 U-boats. Estimated total value of these U-boats, over $500 billion. Development costs for all these classes, over $100 billion on top of that. Total $600 billion worth of U-boat programs based on German technology from 1945. Royalties paid to Germany, zero. Captain Ulrich Gabler, the chief designer, lived until 1989. He saw this global proliferation. He saw the Tang-Class in 1951, the Whiskey class in the 1950s, the GUPPY program, the Nautilus in 1954. Every class used his innovations, but Gabler never received international recognition, never an award, never royalties, never a public honor outside of Germany. He died as a retired engineer. His legacy, 1,350 U-boats worldwide. His name, forgotten. That is the reality for many engineers. They create technology that changes the world. But history remembers nations and wars, not creators. These technical truths are not just history. They are real in every U-boat that patrols today. American Virginia class under the North Polar Sea, Russian Yasen class in the Atlantic, Chinese Shang class in the Pacific, Swedish Gotland in the Baltic Sea, German Type 212 in the Mediterranean. Everyone uses concepts from the Type XXI, a streamlined hull, maximized underwater endurance, a snorkel or equivalent, 80 years of German innovation, in daily use, worldwide. If you appreciate this technical documentation, if you believe that forgotten engineers like Captain Ulrich Gabler deserve recognition, if you understand that technological history is complex and fascinating, then please support this channel. Telling the truth about technology takes time, research, and access to archives. Your support makes it possible to preserve these stories. Think about it. But let's return to Operation Deadlight, November 1945 to February 1946. Upon 16 German U-boats are towed to the Irish Sea, position 55 degrees 30 minutes north, 8 degrees 30 minutes west, northwest of Ireland, depth over 1,000 meters. The procedure: open the exhaust valves, flood the ballast tanks, the U-boat sinks. In 30 seconds, it's underwater. In 2 minutes, it's gone. Repeated 116 times. 116 U-boats sunk. The reason? The Allied forces didn't want this revolutionary technology falling into the wrong hands. Neutral nations. Potential enemies. The solution? Destroy them. But the 30 most advanced U-boats were kept, including 11 Type XXI electric boats. Why Operation Deadlight? Well, the Potsdam Agreement of August 1945 dictated the division of German war materials. Each Allied power received a share, but there were simply too many U-boats for any sensible distribution. The answer: keep the best ones for study and sink the rest. Operation Deadlight was the systematic annihilation of obsolete technology. But the Type XXI electric boat was far from obsolete. The Type XXI was the future. That's why every Type XXI was explicitly excluded from Operation Deadlight. They were just too valuable. The United States received 2, U-3513 and U-3008. The USSR, 4, U-3515, U-2529, U-3035 and U-3421. Great Britain got 2, U-2502 and U-3017, and France received several. Each nation embarked on an intensive study. U-2513 became particularly vital to America. It was brought to the U.S. Navy base in New London, Connecticut, where it operated from 1946 to 1956, 10 years. American submarine crews trained on board, learning the Type XXI systems, experiencing its 17.2 knots submerged, understanding why it was revolutionary. Then, U-2513 was systematically dismantled, every system documented, every innovation catalogued, and that data flowed directly into the Tang-Class design. USS Tang, the first of its class, was commissioned in 1951, only 6 years after the war ended. The similarities to the U-2513 were not coincidental. They were absolutely deliberate. American engineers were systematically copying German innovation. U-3008 met a similar fate. It operated along the Atlantic coast. Tests and training, then dismantling and study. The GUPPY program leveraged data from U-3008. The first GUPPY conversions began in 1947, a mere 2 years after the war ended. That speed shows just where America's priorities lay. Submarine warfare against the Soviet Union was rapidly becoming inevitable in the Cold War. America needed modern submarines immediately. Type XXI provided the blueprint. GUPPY provided the fleet. 52 converted submarines by 1951, all with Type XXI concepts. The GUPPY fleet formed the backbone of the American submarine presence well into the 1960s. The Soviet Union was even more systematic. They received 4 Type XXI electric boats, B-27, B-28, B-29, and B-30. Soviet crews trained on board. Soviet engineers studied every detail. Then, Soviet shipyards began mass production. The Whiskey-class Project 614 started production in 1951, again just 6 years after the war. But over 200 units were built, the largest submarine class in history, all based on a foreign design. Stalin understood submarines were critical for Soviet power projection. Type XXI showed them the way. The Whiskey-class delivered the numbers. By 1958, the Soviet Union had over 200 Whiskies, plus 22 Zulus, plus 20 Romeos, a total of over 240 modern submarines, all Type XXI descendants. America had GUPPY, 52 units. The Soviet Union had quantitative superiority through the systematic mass production of German technology. But there was another dimension. The Type XXI was not perfect. German engineers had been working under the intense pressure of war. Some systems were simply unreliable. The hydraulic torpedo loading systems, a brilliant idea, but prone to leaks. The Snorkel worked, but rough sea conditions could flood it. The batteries, 372 cells, were difficult to maintain. American and Soviet engineers took the Type XXI concepts and improved them. The Tang-Class had more reliable hydraulics. The Whiskey-class had a more robust Snorkel. The GUPPY program used better batteries. This is intelligent technology transfer, not blind copying but adapting and improving, but the basic concepts remained. Type XXI. Today, in 2025, submarines based on Type XXI concepts are still in operation. North Korea uses the Romeo class, 80-year-old technology. The Iranian Kilo class, Soviet-built, Type XXI concepts. The Pakistani Agosta 90B, French-built, Type XXI concepts. The Indonesian Type 209, German-built, Type XXI concepts. It's global. It's everywhere. Type XXI innovation is ubiquitous. The streamlined hull is now standard. Maximized batteries are a priority. The Snorkel is practically a given, and it all comes from 1945. The philosophical question returns: is this theft or evolution? Technology builds on previous technology. Nobody invents in a vacuum. Type XXI itself was based on earlier German U-boat designs, the Type 7, the Type 9. The improvements were revolutionary, but they weren't without precedent. Should the Allies have studied and learned from the Type XXI? Of course. That's how technological progress works. But should they have acknowledged Captain Ulrich Gabler and his team? Should they have paid royalties? Should they have publicly declared that their submarines were based on German innovation? Morally, yes. Practically, no. War victors take the spoils of war. Technology is a spoil. That was accepted in 1945. Today it's more complicated, but the reality remains. The Type XXI was taken, not licensed. Captain Gabler was forgotten, not honored. Douglas O'Regan's book argues this was systematic technology transfer on an industrial scale, not just submarine, but also missiles, jets, electronics and chemicals. Germany in 1945 was technologically advanced in many fields, and the Allied forces took it all. O'Regan calls it intellectual reparations. Germany destroyed Europe, and Europe took German technology as compensation. Is that fair? Well, the answer depends on your moral perspective. But what's undeniable is that it happened, and it shaped the modern world. The Type XXI shaped all modern submarines. That's a fact, not an opinion. The numbers don't lie. 1,350 submarines worldwide since 1945. All with Type XXI concepts, $600 billion in total value, 118 Type XXIs built, only 2 fired torpedoes, and none in combat, but 1,350 descendants. The ratio is 1 to 11.4. For every Type XXI built, 11.4 descendants exist today. For every German innovation in 1945, hundreds of global implementations in 2025. That is the true influence, not wartime performance, but long-term technological legacy. Picture this, an engineer sitting in a modern submarine today. He looks at the streamlined hull, the maximized battery compartments, the snorkel. He may not even know that all of that comes from the Type XXIs. He may think it's just modern engineering, but it's 80-year-old German innovation, invisible, ubiquitous, forgotten, and yet utterly indispensable. That is the ultimate legacy of the Type XXI, not fame, not recognition, but silent, indispensable functionality in every submarine worldwide. Captain Ulrich Gabler died without international acclaim, but his work is in 1,350 submarines. His name, forgotten. His innovation, eternal. The USS Virginia patrolling under the North Pole. The commander remains unaware that his hull is based on a 1945 German design. A Russian Yasen hunts in the Atlantic. Its crew completely oblivious to the fact that their Whiskey-class predecessors were practically carbon copies of the Type XXI. A Chinese Shang guards the South China Sea. The engineers on board have no idea that their Romeo-class descends directly from Soviet replications of the German originals. A Swedish Gotland practices maneuvers in the Baltic Sea. The entire team has no clue that virtually every concept integrated into their submarine was perfected in Hamburg. Way back in 1945, technology transcends knowledge. It works, regardless of whether you know the history behind it or not. Type XXI concepts function brilliantly. That's why they're so ubiquitous. It's also why they're so easily forgotten. Truly successful technology becomes invisible. The technological lineage is undeniable. The Type XXI in 1945 defined modern submarines. The Tang-Class, the Whiskey-class, the A-class, they were all direct copies. The GUPPY program adapted the design. The Nautilus and all subsequent nuclear submarines adopted its hydrodynamic principles. Modern submarines like the Gotland, the Virginia-class, and the Type 212, they all utilize the same fundamental principles. 80 years, 5 generations of submarine design, all tracing back to a single source, Blohm Voss in Hamburg, between 1943 and 1945. Captain Ulrich Gabler and his dedicated team, 118 units built, and over 1,350 descendants worldwide. That's not just impressive, it's unprecedented. No other single submarine class has ever exerted such a profound and global influence. The Type XXI is, quite literally, the mother of all modern submarines. And now, in November 2025, as dozens of submarines patrol the world's oceans, each incorporating concepts pioneered by the Type XXI, each proving that 80-year-old German innovation is still the gold standard. I pose this question to you. Is this technical evolution, or is it systematic theft? Is Captain Ulrich Gabler's forgotten legacy a triumph of German engineering, or a tragedy of stolen innovation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This story offers no easy answers, but it absolutely deserves discussion. Technology shapes the world, and the men who create it deserve to be remembered, even 80 years later, especially 80 years later. The Type XXI revolutionized underwater warfare. The entire world copied it and then forgot its creator. That is the stark reality. But you can help preserve the memory. Share this story. Captain Ulrich Gabler deserves it.